I'm so excited about presenting this particular part of our study on Revelation because this passage or this segment on the church age and Israel's blindness is one of my favorite all-time Bible studies to teach. And I've included it here because of one of the four applications that we looked at of the 7 letters to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation. Is first there was an admonitory application. These were churches that needed to hear the message. There was a specific application. These were 7 specific churches that really existed. There was a personal application to us. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to all of the churches. And then we looked at that 4th application, the prophetic profile, and said maybe, just maybe, in this particular order, and there's nothing in the Bible by chance, there's design elements all throughout, that maybe in this particular order they are a reflection of the church age. It wouldn't make sense in any other order, so maybe it was there by design, and I think probably it was to some degree or another. Maybe it wasn't the major issue here with the 7 letters, but I think it's there, and it's worth our consideration. So I want to look at this period of time that we refer to as the church age, essentially from Pentecost, which happened right after Jesus' ascension, and his second coming, the end of the age, or the rapture of the church, and we'll talk about that in more detail. So I think this is one of the most fascinating Bible prophecies, and it deals with Israel's blindness, and it's got great implication to our understanding of the book of Revelation. So we're going to start this little study, which will be the next 2 sessions, in Romans chapter 11. Now, Romans chapter 11 is about the future of Israel, largely. And Paul says this, "For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery." Now, listen, anytime the Apostle Paul says, "I'm about to tell you a mystery," he has my attention. I want to hear, I want to see very carefully what he has to say here. And this word mystery, it's translated in our English versions as mystery. In the Greek, it's mysterion. It's a little bit different. The meaning of mysterion is a little bit different than our English word mystery. We think of a mystery as being a puzzle that we have to solve. And if we get enough pieces of the puzzle, we can solve the mystery. And that's not what it means in the Greek. What it means in the Greek is this was something that was deliberately hidden. It was deliberately veiled, and it is now being deliberately revealed. That's sort of the essence of the apocalypse. It's something that was hidden in the past and is now being revealed, and that's the essence of this word mysterion. So Paul's about to give a revelation of a mystery that was concealed in the past. And he goes on to say, "So that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening." Now, that word translated hardening here can also be translated a blinding, and it is translated in other versions of the Bible. It's porosis, that's the Greek word, and it has to do with like being covered with a callus. Paul would know all about that, right? Because Paul was very literally blinded after his encounter with Jesus, his Christophany on the road to Damascus, where his eyes were covered with some type of a callus that fell off later. But that's the essence of this word is translated here in our English version, New American Standard, as hardening. It means a blinding, as if covering with a callus. So a partial hardening or blinding has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Well, what does that mean? Well, I think that literally means that when the last Gentile convert comes into the kingdom, Israel's blindness, hardening will be lifted. And we're going to look at what all that means, because that's the era that we're in now, the era of the church age, the Gentile church. Israel, by and large, has rejected Jesus as their Messiah. And as a result, a blinding has occurred that will be lifted at the end of the age when the last Gentile convert comes in. So there's 4 key questions to understanding the mystery of Israel's blindness. First of all, what part was blinded? Because Paul just told us there's a partial blindness here. So it doesn't affect all of the Jews, just a portion of them. And when will the blindness end? Well, we have a clear indication right there. It's that when the fullness of the Gentiles come in. I kind of envision it as like a counter, or not instead of a countdown, it'd be a count up. Every time another Gentile convert comes into the kingdom, it clicks up by 1 notch and 1 number. And you can just kind of imagine that maybe Satan has a gasp of breath there whenever he sees that number increase, thinking maybe that's the one. Maybe that's the last one of the Gentile converts. The question, why were they blinded? That's what we're going to address in this session in the next session as we look at Daniel chapter 9. And what were they blinded from? And we're going to get some insight into that from Luke as we take a close look at Luke chapter 19. So there's two main points about Israel's blindness. First of all, it's partial. It does not include the Jews who recognize Jesus as the Messiah. You know, in modern day, we would call these Messianic Jews, Jews of Jewish heritage that have recognized that Jesus is, in fact, the Messiah. He came once at his first coming. He's coming back again, whereas a lot of the rest of Israel has been blinded to the identity of the Messiah. They're still looking for the Messiah to come because they rejected Jesus as the Messiah. Part of that confusion could have been these bifurcated prophecies that we've dealt with earlier. Secondly, it's temporary. Paul says it's just going to last until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Well, so when that last Gentile convert comes into the kingdom, the blindness is lifted. So if that happens to be you go ahead and come into the kingdom, right? And maybe if you're the last holdout, if you're the last Gentile that has to come in, we don't know, and I'm just joking. But that's the point, that at some point in time, that last one will come in and this blindness will be lifted. So it's only temporary. So that's the fullness of the Gentiles. Now, when is this going to occur? I think, for a number of reasons, it's likely going to occur at the end time, either at the same time contemporaneously with the rapture, or maybe shortly before the rapture of the church. Now, I know y'all are all itching to get into this rapture question. This has been something that's divided the church to a large degree, unfortunately, and we'll deal with that. We're going to deal with the various rapture views. There's three primary rapture views in terms of the timing of the rapture. We're going to look at all three of those, although there's subsets of all three, and I'll share with you where I fall out when we get there. But that's not till chapter 14. That's where we see in the Revelation account the rapture of the church doesn't come about until quite a few chapters from now. So we've got a lot of ground to cover before we get to that point, and we'll pick up a few little clues along the way. But I think you'll hopefully you agree with me here that, and everything that I talk about here obviously is subject to various differences of opinion. I should start out every session with a great big if or a maybe or possibly, because nobody knows with 100% certainty on how to interpret some of this stuff. But I think we're going to come really close, and we'll deal with these as we come to them in our study, and we'll talk about the clues as we encounter them. But so that answers our first two questions, right? The first two questions was, what part is blinded? I think it's going to turn out to be those that don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah, and it's only temporary. When will it end? It's temporary until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. So what about our third question? Why were they blinded? Well, in order to gain an answer to that question, we're going to have to look at a very interesting prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. This prophecy is a real key to our understanding of the end times, and it turns out it unlocks an awful lot about the apocalypse, about the Revelation. So let's take a look at Daniel chapter 9. Remember, Daniel is in the Babylonian exile, and he's been taken under by Nebuchadnezzar, and there's a whole story in the book of Daniel leading up to this, and this is when he gets a visitation from the angel Gabriel. So let's take a look at the text. Now, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel, who I'd seen in the vision previously. So Daniel recognizes Gabriel, and that we looked at this a little bit when we did our study of Revelation chapter 1 and the vision of Jesus that John was describing, and how closely that paralleled Daniel's account of another individual that visited him in Daniel chapter 10, the chapter after the chapter that we're looking at now. And so we looked at what or who might this person be, and I presented the possibility that it could have been a pre-incarnate Christ, a Christophany, because it wasn't Gabriel apparently, because Daniel had already had an encounter with Gabriel, and unless Gabriel had dramatically changed his appearance, he was able to recognize him. And from a prior encounter with Gabriel, we know it wasn't Michael, because the individual in Daniel 10 is fighting against the prince of Persia with Michael. So it wasn't either of the two named angels, Gabriel and Michael. So we made that argument back in chapter 1. But here we have Gabriel. Gabriel is always on a messenger type of a mission. He may in fact be an archangel. He may be the archangel, the head chief angel of the messenger angels. The scripture doesn't call him an archangel. It does call Michael an archangel, but there's some reasons to speculate that maybe Gabriel. Certainly he's very special. He's the one that gave the message to Mary about Jesus being born and assuming the throne of his father David, and we looked at that before. So anyway, this is Gabriel showing up to Daniel, and he's going to dictate this prophecy to him. It's not like Daniel has this vision or whatever. Gabriel's actually dictating to him what to write down, very much the same way that Jesus dictated to John, is dictating to John in our study of Revelation. So this is the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me instruction and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, the command was issued, and I've come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. So we want to pay really, really close attention here, because Gabriel's giving Daniel something very, very significant. And he's telling him to take heed and understand the vision. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. Let me just pause here and tell you, when we talk about 70 weeks here, these are weeks of years that we're speaking of. When we use the English word week, we almost invariably are referring to a 7-day period. Well, the Hebrew word that's being translated here as week can mean a week of days. It could also mean a week of years. It's a heptad. It could mean a group of 7. So contextually here, I think you'll see as we go further into this study, we're talking about weeks of years. So 70 weeks of years. So 70 times 7 years is what we're talking about here. So what would that be? 490 years total period that we're talking about here. So 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. Well, he's talking to Daniel, so quite clearly Daniel's people would be the Jews and the holy city would be Jerusalem. So this prophecy is specifically about the Jews, about the nation of Israel, and the holy city of Jerusalem. And it goes on to, watch this, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, what in the world is Gabriel talking about here? This sounds to me an awful lot like Jesus' second coming and the millennial kingdom. Look at the language here. To finish the transgression. Well, apparently transgression's not been finished. So we've still got people sinning, right? To make an end of sin. That's not happening. We've still got that going on in the world. To make atonement for iniquity. You can make an argument here that occurred at the cross, and certainly it did. Daniel would have been in Daniel's future, so he's looking future to the cross. That could be, but I think when you look at the prophecy as a whole, there's a whole lot more going on here than just the crucifixion of Jesus. To bring in everlasting righteousness. That hasn't happened yet, not in our experience, not on planet Earth. To seal up vision and prophecy, that hadn't happened. Well, it had not happened in Daniel's time, certainly, and didn't happen at the crucifixion either, by the way, because we had other prophecies being fulfilled. We had other scripture being written with the epistles and the book of Acts and all that, and the book of Revelation for that matter. It's been sealed up now, but had not been then. And to anoint the most holy place. So when we talk about the most holy place, that's the Holy of Holies in the temple. It was destroyed shortly after Jesus' death and ascension in 70 AD, 30 or so years, 40 years later. So the temple does not exist today. So we believe that there is going to be a third temple built, likely on the Temple Mount or in the proximity. We'll deal with that later as to what the actual location of the third temple might be. But there's a lot of prophecies that seem to indicate that a third temple will be built now in the future. Before Jesus' return. Now, so that could be the holy place that's being referenced here. It could also mean Ezekiel's temple. I actually think that might be more likely. We have in the book of Ezekiel a vision that he had of a millennial temple, different from the temple on the Temple Mount, much larger, And that may be the one that's been talking about here, but still yet something future in the end times, at the second coming, or into the millennial kingdom, where all these things are going to be wrapped up. Jesus comes back and he puts an end to sin and iniquity and brings in the millennial kingdom and the everlasting righteousness. So that's what it sounds like he's talking about here to me. This is an end time prophecy, but Gabriel's filling in a lot of the details here. And he goes on. So you are to know and discern, watch this, that from the issuing of a decree to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, and that also could be translated Messiah the King. It probably should be translated Messiah the King. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So pay close attention here. We've got a period of 7 weeks of years, followed by, so that'd be, that'd be 49 years, and followed by 62 weeks of years. I think that's 483. Check my math on that. So we got the 49 years and then the 483 years, a total of 69 weeks of years, all right? And that period of 69 weeks of years is going to begin with a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, not the temple, but the city itself. And that's going to become very important to our understanding of the timeline of this prophecy here. So stick with me. He goes on to say, and then the ending of this will be Messiah the King, the Messiah coming in as king, proclaiming himself to be king. We're going to look at that here in a little bit too. All right. It will be built again, the city, with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then, after the 62 weeks, so remember, we've got 7 weeks, and then the 62 weeks follows it. So this is after the entire 69 weeks of years. We've got 7 weeks first of years, then 62 weeks of years. So after the total 69 weeks of years, the Messiah will be cut off. And that word translated cut off here means to be killed. Well, we know that happened at Calvary, at Jesus' crucifixion. So he's going to be cut off and have nothing. And the people, watch this, the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, the temple. Now, that kind of, some people, that kind of sounds like we might be talking about Jesus, the prince who is to come. Well, Jesus is a prince. He's really a king who is going to come again. We get that, but that's not the prince being talked about here. This is a different prince. I'm going to present to you, I think this is, in fact, the Antichrist, the person that we have dubbed the Antichrist, the coming world ruler, that we're going to learn a whole lot more about when we get to Revelation chapter 13. But I'll just whet your appetite here. So Gabriel's telling Daniel that it's the people of the prince who is to come. Whoever this person is that's yet to come even in our future, I believe. There are the preterists that will argue that all this happened in AD 70. Well, the temple was destroyed. The city was destroyed in AD 70 by Titus leading the Syrian contingent of the Roman legion. So there's a really, really good argument to be made that the prince who is yet to come is going to come out of that people group. Could very well be an Assyrian, and we're going to look at that when we get into our study of who this person might be. It may very well have been, but his people are the ones that are going to destroy the city. That happened in AD 70, so we know that happened. That's in our past. It was in Daniel's future. And his end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. There are 6 important points I want you to get about this Daniel 9 prophecy. The first is we're talking about weeks of years, not weeks of days. All right, that Hebrew word just means a group of 7. It's a heptad. So it can mean 7 years, 7 days, 7 months. It's a group of 7. In this case, it's years. You'll see why in a minute. There's 2 time periods. There's a period of 69 weeks. The 7 weeks of years plus the 62 weeks of years is a total of 69 weeks of years. That's the first time period. Those 2 combined together. And then there's a final 70th week that is yet in our future. I believe we'll be able to show you that's that final 7 years that's often referred to as the tribulation period. Might be a bit of a misnomer, but that's what it's commonly called. Thirdly, there's an unspecified interval between these 2 time periods. We don't know how long that's going to last. There's a gap between the 69 weeks of years and the 70th week of years. And we don't know how long that gap's going to last. I believe that's the period that we're in right now. We often refer to it as a church age. And that's why I'm including this particular study in this overall Revelation study, particularly with the 7 letters to the 7 churches, because prophetically they may indicate the timeline of the church history in the particular order those 7 letters appear. So everything's there by design. So that could be, I think there's a compelling evidence that it is. That's why I wanted to include this, because I think it ties into our overall understanding of the divine outline given to John to write the things you have seen, which was the vision of Jesus, with the lampstands, and is the things that are, which are the 7 churches. That's us, that's now, that's the church age. John was living in the church age from, say, about Pentecost, when the church began, until Jesus returns, or at least until the rapture of the church. Yet in our future, John was already in that unspecified time period. And he says the things that are, and the things that will happen after these things. That will be the 70th week yet to come, that most of the rest, or really the rest of the book of Revelation, is all about. So we don't know how long that time period is going to last. It's been over 2,000 years so far. These are 69 weeks of biblical years. These are 360-day years. Not 365-day years, 360-day years. Biblically, that was the Jewish calendar. And if you do the math on that, and you take the 69 weeks of years times the 7 years per week times 360 days as a solar year of the ancient calendars, you come up with a total of 173,880 days. So that's the time period of the 69 weeks of years. And we know that it kicks off with the decree to rebuild the city, and it ends with Messiah the King. So there's a trigger and there's a target for those 69 weeks. The 70th week, that's yet to come. That's yet in our future. That we often refer to it as the tribulation period. Jesus was a bit more precise at the Olivet Discourse. He said the last half of that 7 years, he referred to it as the Great Tribulation. So it's a little bit confusing and a little bit imprecise, but typically evangelicals will talk about the tribulation period being that final 7 years. Might be more precise to refer to it as the 70th week of Daniel. But then you start to get into the rapture theories about, was it pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation, rapture, and you see the word tribulation being used in that context. So we'll use it from time to time, but I want to be sure to make that distinction. But these are 6 important points for us to consider in our understanding of this Daniel 9 prophecy. Now, prior to 700 BC or so, almost all of the ancient calendars used a 360-day solar year. We can find it throughout the ancient cultures, Babylonian, Assyrian, Chaldean, even in the Americas with the Peruvian and the Mayan calendars, the Hindu calendars from the Far East, and Chinese and Japanese as well. So throughout the world, we see a 360-day solar year prior to about 700 BC. It's, were they just stupid? They couldn't count the number of days in a year? I don't think so. I think there might be something more interesting at work here, because there was this reorganization that took place around 700 BC where we converted over to this 365 and a quarter, that's why we have leap years, 365 and a quarter day solar year. Now, could that be, this is speculative, could that be to the long day of Joshua, where the sun stood still for a period of time so that Joshua could finish defeating the enemies? Could that be due to a Mars, a close pass by of the planet Mars, which would have slowed the rotation of the Earth? There's some compelling evidence of that. Can't say we know it with great definity, but it's worth taking a look at. I'd encourage you to do your own study on that. It's interesting that there's a strange corroboration by Jonathan Swift in his book Gulliver's Travels, where there's mentions of the moons of Mars that are listed with great precision, and the telescopes that would have allowed astronomers to know that fact was not invented yet in Jonathan Swift's time. So that's an interesting correlation. Maybe there's something to it, maybe not, but take a look at it. Be a good Berean, study all this stuff anyway. So let's talk about this trigger. We've got a trigger, which is the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, the city. In our next segment, we'll talk more about the trigger, and then we'll see what the target is all about, Messiah the King.